Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kate Slevin, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Regional Plan Association. On behalf of RPA, I want to welcome all of you to the final of three events in our Connecticut Governors Forum series for the 2026 election season. I also want to welcome Senator Ryan Fazio and thank you for participating in this important conversation. For over 100 years, RPA has been the leading research, planning, and advocacy organization in the New Jersey, Connecticut, New York tri-state area, mapping out a positive vision for our region to be more prosperous, equitable, and sustainable. We do this by publishing once in a generation a regional plan that outlines goals to achieve this vision. Our fourth regional plan was published in 2017 and serves as the basis for how we determine our priorities as an organization, including for this election season in Connecticut. Terms like affordability and abundance particularly resonate with voters in this election cycle. But RPA has always taken a long-term view and worked for smart planning to make our region abundant and affordable for everyone. We've outlined bold but practical and achievable goals for Connecticut across the deeply related issue areas. First, build more homes where more people can thrive. Second, move Connecticut forward with modern, reliable transportation. Third, power Connecticut's clean energy future. And fourth, rebuild state capacity for effective governance. We look forward to hearing from Senator Fazio's response. And once again, thank you all for attending today. I will now turn it over to our Connecticut Director, Pete Harrison, to get into a conversation with Senator Fazio. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. And welcome, everybody. And certainly welcome to you, Senator Fazio. And just a quick thank you for your support during the session on SB 339, our Golden Girls bill. Our goal in this series and today with Senator Fazio is to raise the issues that we believe are critical to delivering a better Connecticut today and in the long term, to help the voting public understand how you think about these issues, and to start what we hope to be a productive conversation through this election cycle into the next 4 years and beyond. Just for folks watching, this is not a debate. We do not endorse candidates. It is just an educational platform to serve as a reference for candidates and for voters. We have asked each of the campaigns for 45 minutes to cover questions on our 4 core issues, as well as an additional short lightning round, and finally, audience questions. We have shared topics, but not specific questions with each of the campaigns. In the interest of covering as many of our priorities as possible, we have asked the candidates to be as concise as they can be. I will not be asking any follow-up questions, so this is where you, the audience, comes in. If you hear anything you would like to have the candidate expand on, or don't hear something, please share it in the webinar's Q&A feature. Shorter questions without commentary will have a better chance of getting asked, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible at the end. This series is being streamed live on CTN, and we are recording this forum. If there is a technical glitch at any point, we'll just pause to fix it and continue. Our first 2 forums are posted online on our website and on CTN's. For folks that couldn't attend today, look for the recording of this forum in the near future. All right, let's get started. Good to go, Ryan?
I'm good, Pete.
All right. Senator Fazio, Connecticut is often ranked among the states with the highest housing costs and lowest production, highest transportation and energy costs, and largest property tax burden. Some of these problems are longstanding in Connecticut and certainly part of broader national trends. You have been a member of the General Assembly since 2020 and part of the minority party that has been critical both of the governor and the majority. However, your party's vision for the state has struggled to convince voters to date. We hope today's forum can cover what your vision for the state looks like and why you believe you are the right person to lead that change. Our first topic is build more homes of all kinds where people thrive. Polls, including our own, show that housing costs continue to be one of the top concerns in our state, and we remain at or near the bottom of housing production in the country. Nearly 30% of homeowners and half of all home renters are housing cost burden, and there's been a 10% surge in homelessness in the last year alone. To increase affordability, security, and choice, we must build more homes and more kinds of homes, particularly in smart places with transit and other infrastructure. First question. Senator Fazio, you were obviously vocal in opposition to 5002 and 8002 during debate in the previous sessions. Now that Public Act 25-1 is the law, if you are elected governor, how would you approach implementing it, or what would you do to attempt to change it?
Well, I appreciate the questions, Pete. I appreciate the RPA for having me. We all know that we've disagreed on some bills in the past, but we've also found agreement in the past too. My concern is that 8002 was flawed overall. It's complex. There's a lot of constituent parts of it. But I also firmly believe that the original premise of your statements, have validity, that housing is too expensive in Connecticut and that Connecticut is too expensive writ large. And that's pushing out working people. It's pushing out jobs and opportunity, and that we need a vision, a balanced approach for the future to make housing affordable, to make the state affordable, and to allow families to thrive. And housing is an important component of that. For all the rancor about housing in Connecticut, and I've been a participant in that over the last 5 years, I think housing is one of the areas that is most ripe for grand compromise and a way forward. And I've said that, I think, time and time again. I think the three components of housing reform that we could edit or change the approach in 8002 with are: first, cost controls; second, adding housing supply; and third, providing respect to local control in many forms. So first, on the cost front, we need to reform the property tax system and get property taxes under control. I've proposed a property tax cap paired with mandate relief to towns and cities. We need to support the building trades. We need to get more tradesmen into Connecticut, into the workforce, so we can build more housing. It's a very important and crucial bottleneck that needs to be alleviated. So low or no licensing fees, more reciprocity and ease in getting licenses into the trades, and support for apprentices, relief to the apprenticeship cap, support for vocational education. Second, we need to expand supply, and there is reforms that need to be made on the zoning front, especially in middle zoning or middle housing, the types of areas where I think localities will support that much more housing. I think getting the political buy-in is important. So that means more residential development in mixed use areas, particularly. I think that's even more important than transit areas. That means more accessory dwelling units. I supported the Golden Girls bill, and I think we can get that done. And the reform to the building codes. I said that I was supportive of single stairwell reform, and I'd like to get that redone in a way that people buy into, among other building, elevator type stuff as well. And then finally, when that happens, I think you need to do it in concert with 830G relief. 830G is layered on top of 8002, which is part of the consternation. 830G, I think, is unique compared to the rest of the country in how much it requires. And I think providing that 830G relief paired with those other pro-housing, pro-building reforms is the right way forward that will result in lower costs, more housing, and more growth with the political buy-in.
Yeah, thanks for that. And you touched on a couple of the follow-up questions I've had. The first one is, increasingly across the country, outdated building and fire codes have been seen as a barrier, particularly this missing middle housing that has higher opportunity for ownership that we value in Connecticut. You'd mentioned your support for single stair already. If you are elected governor, what other types of building and code reforms would you be interested in, that whether administratively or legislatively? And I know you've outlined a couple already, so this can be quick, I think.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I was supportive of a single stairwell. Let's always do things in a way that we can get the most people on board as possible. And that starts with leadership from the top. If you're leading from behind, then you're going to have these problems with actually passing and implementing reforms. So you got to have buy-in from the top and active engagement from the top. And I think elevators are also an area where we hear that the cost is that much higher here than in Europe, for instance. And when Europe is outpacing you in efficiency, then you got a problem. So elevators and single stairwells are definitely an area other than soccer that we need to look at.
You mentioned this a little bit too, but other states, red, blue, purple, have been driving ambitious pro-homes agendas with substantive zoning laws at the state level. Realtor.com just gave Connecticut an F for the second straight year and categorized our state as the stagnant bottom. You have been supportive of various measures as Senate for some state zoning reforms. You mentioned a couple here, including ADUs. But yeah, what are other specific pieces, or if you want to expand on ADUs or missing mixed use housing, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because if you look at the other states and the zoning reforms that they've undertaken, they've been very focused on the small scale development and the missing middle. Montana, New Hampshire, yes, red states, but it's been very focused on the middle and rather than the very, very large scale development. And I think that's where, when I call for a grand compromise, I'm talking about you need to provide 830G relief to the towns because that's what they're in many cases very concerned about, the large scale without the local zoning input. And then you can provide the substantial missing middle zoning reforms to make the mixed use development, to make the ADUs, to make the Golden Girls all more feasible. And I think that is the way forward. So, yes, I think that the Montana reforms, New Hampshire's reforms, a couple other states that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, provide us valuable lessons and have admirable aspects of them. But I think they need to be contextualized in Connecticut, and that's part of the reason why pairing that type of reform with 830G reform is the way forward.
Our second topic is move Connecticut forward with modern, reliable transportation. Our state has some of the worst highway congestion, above average length of commutes, and some of the highest household transportation costs in the nation. In addition, nearly 30% of households in cities like Hartford and New Haven do not own a car and must rely on a transit system with limited utility. A more robust and reliable transit system would benefit all of us and is also key to meeting our economic and environmental goals. First question. RPA believes buses should be the top priority for enacting this vision, but currently we have a disjointed network of 17 systems with limited frequency connections and unintegrated fare boxes. How would you, as governor, create a fast and fair bus network?
It's interesting that it is disjointed. The network is disjointed because the overall bus system in Connecticut is more heavily financed by state taxpayers than in other states. I think I don't remember the exact numbers, but financially, the bus system in Connecticut is very heavily reliant on state taxpayers and the state budget, which might be great or might not be great. But the point is, if you have disjointed networks, it doesn't have to be that way because the state is already by far the biggest stakeholder in the bus system. I think, overall, if I'm not going to always diss the way Connecticut does things, I think, we have, okay ridership in Connecticut. We have invested financially in the bus system. The bus system is important to Connecticut's success in providing people with transportation accessibility, ensuring that they're, at a reasonable cost, that those networks are integrated, and that they're clean and safe for everybody, are important standards. So I'm open-minded to investments and strategies to improve the bus system. But, I support a robust bus system, and Connecticut has financially certainly invested in its buses, maybe even more than most states.
Yeah, and relatedly, and we'll talk about the funding in a second, but our proximity to New York City and the Northeast Corridor via rail is a major economic and social advantage to our state. But trains are still slower today than decades ago, and ridership patterns have shifted substantially since COVID. What is your vision for the rail side of our transit network?
Yeah, I think the New Haven line is the most ridden passenger rail line in the entire country, and it's extraordinarily important to Connecticut's success, as all of our rail is. But it's slower than it was 50 and 60 years ago, which, again, it doesn't have to be that way. Again, if Europe is doing things more efficiently than you are, you got a problem. And, it's not just the heavy duty infrastructure investments that could probably speed up our rail system. It's things like improving the scheduling. We have huge buffers in our scheduling. We have very kind of idiosyncratic and inconsistent scheduling, which is probably an important component that needs to be addressed in order to speed up our rail lines. The rail car purchases in Connecticut have been questionable at best. They've been more expensive, kind of more heavy than in other places, which could slow down the rail service. And, it's even in question whether we could simply speed up the trains as is within, federal regulations and safety standards. So I think there is room for improvement on rail. It's an area I'd like to prioritize as governor, I'm not a civil engineer. I'm not going to tell you I'm an expert, but it strikes me from what I've read into the industry that there is major room for improvement for Connecticut, and we need to prioritize that.
So you've alluded to this already, but stable funding is a critical need for good public transit, including bus, rail, and microtransit. But the Department of Transportation has reported at various times that the main source of transit funding, the Special Transportation Fund, is in trouble. So how do you plan to fund the types of investments and improvements you've talked about for the transit system?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that we're going to fall into deficits in the future in the Special Transportation Fund as more and more people turn from gas-powered vehicles to electric vehicles, which is an innovation in our economy that's generally positive, but it's going to have costs that need to be addressed. And one of them is the fact that the gas tax is a major source of revenue for the Special Transportation Fund, and it's naturally going to decline over time. And I think having some sort of skin in the game for electric vehicles as part of our special transportation system, perhaps most likely in higher registration fees that feed into the special transportation fund, makes sense. They should be reasonable, but there should be a fair share that's paid by electric vehicles, especially because they're heavier and impose more wear and tear on the road. So I think, electric vehicles and those innovations in the economy have generally been positive, but they need to be contributing to the Special Transportation Fund. And on the Transportation Committee and other committees in the state government, I've seen electric vehicle owners come to the public hearing saying, it's totally reasonable for me to pay my fair share. I think more electric vehicle owners testified in favor of a registration fee to go into the Special Transportation Fund than against it, from my recollection. So that is probably the most logical. And I think there's been bipartisan support for that sort of change, which is just a natural need.
Our third topic is Power Connecticut's clean energy future. The state has passed climate objectives for a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and to be net zero by 2050. However, Connecticut is currently projected to achieve just 34% and 44% of those reductions, respectively, obviously falling short of those goals. Furthermore, even though Connecticut generates a considerable amount of power for New England, our residents have the fourth highest utility bills in the nation. We must modernize our energy infrastructure and oversight to transition to a more affordable and sustainable energy strategy. First question. Despite our emission mandates, many advocates do not think they are ambitious enough given the scale of the climate crisis. Do you agree with the state's current emission goals? Why or why not?
Oh, I think they're costly as is. I spent years of my career in the renewable energy industry. It's an area where I've taken keen interest in the state legislature, and I'm a firm believer that we can protect our environment while ensuring that Connecticut is affordable and that energy bills are affordable for our residents. And currently, the state of things is that we are failing horribly on those fronts. Over the last 25 years, Connecticut's actually seen its carbon emissions from its power sector decline by about 50%, or New England writ large. And the reason for that is not because of the state mandates or any other laws, but because of the innovation in the energy sector that made natural gas, which has half the carbon emissions of oil or coal, much more affordable compared to oil or coal, which have basically gone by the wayside in the New England power grid, which is an entirely positive development. Likewise, we need to support nuclear energy, which is an important component, especially Millstone, to the northeastern grid. Hopefully, and I've been very supportive of reforms and have authored reforms to make it easier for new nuclear to be commercialized and deployed in New England whenever the time comes with that industry with small modular reactors. But there is so much cost. There are so many hidden taxes in our energy bill that make it impossible for Connecticut's economy to grow. How can we create manufacturing jobs? How can we create business investment? How can the working class afford to live in Connecticut when we have the second highest energy bills in the country? The current strategy just is not working, but I am a believer that we can protect our environment and reduce the cost of government mandates and fees and make energy affordable in our state. And it's vital for our economic future.
Yeah, and you obviously have taken interest in this in the Senate. And just as data point for folks on the call here, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the current mix, which you've alluded to, of energy in Connecticut, it's about 62% gas, oil, 34% nuclear, 1% renewable. Although with the caveat, Revolution Wind coming online, we'll get that up at the end of the year to about 5% and 1% hydro. You've talked about nuclear, a couple other natural gas, but what do you think is the ideal mix of energy in Connecticut?
Oh boy, I'm certainly not smart enough to tell you exactly what the energy sector should be producing from each source of fuel to make energy reliable and affordable and clean for Connecticut. It's not the ability of any governor or bureaucrat or anybody, any individual, to say exactly what it should be. My educated guess is that the future of kind of energy in Connecticut looks not so dissimilar from what the mix is. It's probably going to still be a plurality of natural gas, followed by nuclear, followed by wind and solar and hydro. We need to make sure that all of those sources have to compete against each other. I believe that when industries have to compete rather than depend on government and taxpayers and ratepayers for subsidies and special privileges, that they actually succeed the most in the long run. The area of the country where we're seeing the greatest success of solar, for instance, is in Texas, and they have to compete. But they're the largest source of new energy, which is a great development. And the new loads that come online, whether they're manufacturers or compute, they're more reliant on solar than any other form of energy, and it's not with subsidy. And to the point of your statistics, that we're 1% renewables in the state before Revolution Wind comes on. That's after billions of dollars of subsidy. So we can have a strategy that helps these industries succeed: solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, all of the above. But it's got to be smart rather than imposing major costs on ratepayers when they're already paying the second highest energy costs in the country.
RPA and other leading climate groups agree that a transition to renewable energy is one of the primary long-term solutions to lowering costs. However, obviously, voters demand action now. You have been particularly vocal on this, have been an all the above approach as a senator and as a candidate. But how do you, in the immediate sense as governor, balance this short-term, very real problem folks are facing on the electricity bills with the fact that a lot of these strategies are long-term solutions?
We have to do what's practical and what advances our goals of protecting our environment and making Connecticut's economy competitive and reducing costs on Connecticut residents. That especially means looking after considerations like clean air and clean water, which are going to be immediately felt, especially by our most vulnerable residents. We also want to, reduce the overall impacts on the environment of our energy sector. It has to be done in a reasonable and deliberative way. I think that is most likely going to mean nuclear, some solar, some wind, but at an affordable cost where those industries compete and they drive down costs. And, I've been a vocal supporter of nuclear, but that doesn't mean I'm for putting new nuclear plants online at any cost. I have a responsibility as a senator or as a governor to be a fiduciary for our residents to ensure that they're not paying the highest cost in the country. So the way things have worked best in the past, when we've actually driven down our environmental footprint, is when there was competition and innovation rather than where government tried to dictate it with mandates or higher taxes. So let's create a playing field that encourages that innovation and improvement while driving down costs, rather than the current approach under the Lamont administration, which is more mandates, more taxes, higher costs. And guess what? If all the capital, all the jobs, all the people move out of Connecticut, that's not going to be helpful for the environment either.
Our final topic today is rebuild state capacity for effective governance. Connecticut's significant needs in housing production, public transit modernization, energy grid transformation depend on the state's capacity to implement them. After decades of fiscal constraints, in many cases, state agencies, COGS, and local governments are under-resourced, lack necessary technical assets, and have limited strategic clarity and coordination between them. If you want to solve our state's biggest crises, we have to rebuild the machinery of efficient government. First question. Many major cities in Connecticut are smaller today than they were generations ago. We were just talking before about the growth of Stamford. But our cities remain economic and cultural centers, and we believe they are critical to our state's responsible growth. What is your strategy as governor to unlock the potential of our urban centers?
That's a great question. And, if I'm to compliment the governor, when he came into office, he had a plan or an ambition to double the size of Connecticut cities. And Connecticut has small cities. And it's probably somewhat of an economic disadvantage that our cities, haven't seen the growth for the entire state. In fact, many of our cities are smaller than they were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And listen, going back to I love the term state capacity. It's an important one, actually, but you can never have state capacity if you're broke. And Connecticut getting its fiscal house in order and prioritizing the vital investments is necessary in order to ensure that we have state capacity so we can provide the services that are most important, so that we can make the investments that are most important. Connecticut still has the second highest bonded debt per capita of any state. It still has one of the 5 worst unfunded liabilities for state employee benefits in the entire country. And until and unless we get that in order, we'll never have the state capacity or the resources to invest in the infrastructure, in the housing, in the vital fixed asset needs to provide an affordable livelihood and economic growth for our people. So there needs to be fiscal guardrails. And I think it's a great disservice to the taxpayer and to the workers of this state that this governor, after 8 years, has abandoned the fiscal guardrails, including the spending cap and the volatility cap. But once we have our fiscal house in order, it'll make it easier to invest in the vital infrastructure to have our cities grow. I think the one thing maybe we can, going forward, make a note of for our housing discussions and debates that you all at RPA, and Pete especially, have been integral in, is how do we grow the size of our cities? Because there is scale there. You can have a walkable life or less need on the use of an automobile. If you live in a more dense city, you have access to more services. Jobs and businesses come in and create investment and jobs and growth. So I think investing in our cities and seeing our cities grow and succeed and limit costs on the residents is vital and an important, I think, addition to our conversation in the years going forward about housing.
Yeah, and relatedly, in terms of fiscal order and building up state capacity, next question is, if you had a magic wand, what 3 things would you change to create a more integrated, innovative, and fiscally sustainable state bureaucracy to meet our conservation and development goals?
First, we need to make Connecticut an affordable place that middle class and working class families can afford to live in, that they can get jobs in, and can grow old and retire in. And so that means, first and foremost, we have to cut out of control costs like energy costs and energy bills. I put forward a plan that will reduce energy bills for families by 15 to 20% by cutting the hidden costs embedded in our energy bill that aren't providing a return on an investment. We need to, second, protect or renew our budgetary guardrails to limit excessive debt and spending. So grow spending at the rate of household income growth. Make sure that we're not taking on too much debt. That way we'll have the fiscal capacity and the growth in the future to invest in vital services. And third, we need to reform our tax code and our tax system to provide the largest middle-class tax cut in state history. I'm calling for thousands of dollars of tax relief for the average family in Connecticut in my first term, and reform and cap our property tax system. Housing can never be affordable as long as we have the 3rd highest property taxes in the entire country, and reforming and capping those property taxes are vital too. So eliminate the hidden taxes in our energy bills to reduce costs, cut middle-class income taxes by $1,500 per year, and cap property taxes while also renewing our budgetary guardrails and discipline. Those are 4, but those would be my priorities.
And they are a good segue to the final question. Not surprisingly, Regional Plan Association is interested in smart regional governance. Many voters, as you point out, and municipalities are worried about local property tax burdens. You have been a vocal defender of local control, but Do you see some form of regionalization as a way to address the strain on municipal budgets while encouraging growth across the state? Why or why not?
Well, listen, we certainly already have in Connecticut, some regional services, regional school districts, and I think that creating scale is very helpful in certain cases, and I think municipalities will generally have a good sense of when they need to band together and regionalize, and ensuring that there's state capacity, as you say, on the state level, so that municipalities will be more eager to opt in to the state services or the state administration of those services is important. So, I'm not sure I have the most clear answer, but I think that municipalities will know where they need the scale at the state level, and that having those resources available to them, and that was part, in some cases, part of some of the housing reforms that I even disagreed with, availing smaller municipalities of state services to help them is an important component, while also protecting some local discretion.
All right. Well, that wraps up the 2026 priority portion of our event. And now I want to jump over to our lightning round. But just a reminder to the audience, we will have time for audience questions. So do please add them into the webinar's Q&A function. So Ryan, these can be short answer, even one-word answer in some cases. And I will disclose, I did give a heads up on one of the questions, which we'll get to. But we'll start first with, what is your favorite building in Connecticut?
Oh, that's a good question. I love my church, St. Mary's Church, down in Greenwich. I think it's beautiful, but I also love the state capitol. I think it's a really stunning building, and there's not a day that I've been in the Senate in my 5.5 years that I haven't felt really lucky to be there, and kind of awed by the beauty of the architecture and the building, and kind of it's a special place as well.
Yeah, it's funny that Mark Twain had said it was like an ugly, ugly building. I never understood that about it. Didn't always have the smartest design and fiscal sense, I guess, as personally. So next question is your favorite public park.
I guess my favorite public park has to be Waveney Park in New Canaan, where Amy and I got engaged, and where we also had our first date. So that's an easy
I'm sure she will appreciate that answer more than anyone else on this call. Also. Okay, next question. What is your favorite non-Connecticut U.S. city?
I mean, I guess I do love New York. I mean, I love the bustle. I love the culture there. So, we're so close to New York that I've spent a lot of time there. I mean, Chicago, I went to college near Chicago, and Chicago is also a really cool city architecturally. So I also do love Chicago.
Okay, so one of the parts of 8002 that is now in law as of July 1st is the parking reform. So as a very broad question, you interpret as you will, parking in Connecticut, too much, not enough, or just right?
It has to depend on the area you're in. I mean, I have some towns in my district that there is parking, feels like it's in huge shortage, and there's others where there is ample parking. I said on the floor that yes, I oppose the no parking requirements until there's 16 units, but it's totally reasonable to say that there are excessive parking requirements in certain development decisions made by planning and zoning boards. So there's some areas that there's too much, and there's some areas where there's too little. I couldn't say overall.
Next question is, when was the last time you took a trip on a bus, a train, or a bike?
A train. I certainly use Metro North all the time. I think last time I did a bus was a few years ago. So yeah.
And then bike, if you want to close that.
I think last summer.
Next question, sort of up at the federal level. Big bipartisan bill passed on Housing 20th Century Road to Housing Act. Would you urge the president to sign it, and why?
I've only read the headlines about it, so I don't know what's in it. I assume that if it had some bipartisan, if it had bipartisan support in a Republican-controlled legislature, that there with Democrat support, that it's probably got a lot of merit. But I'll reserve. I just actually don't know what's in it, so I'll reserve comments exactly on that.
Okay, fair enough. This is the question I gave you a bit of a heads up on, so now I expect a really good answer. But who's going to win the World Cup?
Um, I know that the favorite is considered to be France right now, but I think if you look at some of the advanced metrics, it's actually Spain that's playing the best. So I'm going to say Spain, even though they're not the favorite at the moment.
All right, going against the counter. That's good.
Agreeing.
We'll see. And then just final heads up question: where did you spend Fourth of July?
Oh, I spent Fourth of July all over Connecticut. I think on the 4th, I was marching in Groton. And then we went to Willimantic for the festivities there. And then I was back in Stamford to watch some fireworks.
Nice, and I hope it didn't get washed out or anything.
We all got hit pretty hard down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great storm.
I did actually have one more question. I almost forgot it, and it was the most fun question. So I'm sorry that I almost forgot it. But in what population do you think Connecticut should be by 2050? So thinking a little bit farther out, what population do you think the state should be?
Again, I would deign to know exactly, but it should be bigger. I mean, this state has so much to offer, and we've seen very, very little population growth over the last 10 years. And we need better policy, more affordability in order to make that happen. So I can't know exactly what it should be, but this is a great state that should shoot for the moon and has all the attributes needed to succeed and grow. So if we have the right policy and affordability, the answer will be higher.
All right, we'll consider that. I usually like a number or percentage, but that was positive and
4.23 million. Exactly.
okay. Appreciate that. Um, all right, so in our final few minutes, we have about 4 or 5 minutes here. We will be turning to audience member questions. Thanks to everybody for providing them. It sounds like we got a lot of them. I'll try to get to the top here. So this is top question here. Besides pushing for 830G relief to complement 25-1, how do you plan to implement the law as it exists now?
There's 53 sections in the bill. So, implementation is going to be very complicated. And, one of my concerns is that it was too sprawling. I mean, I get that it was the result of compromise between some. And so there's probably not a single person, maybe RPA included, that's thrilled with the legislation because it's the result of so much compromise and disagree. And even so, there was kind of bipartisan opposition to the bill. But I think, for instance, the concept of housing growth zones is something that could work, I think, paired with what I proposed in the 830G relief, because, maybe having, one size across the board zoning reform in a town or a city isn't wise, but the town would know a certain area where zoning reform would work. So, I also worry that kind of having the planning requirements on some of our smaller municipalities where they don't have the infrastructure is problematic. I would like to see the implementation and the law, kind of give consideration to those smaller municipalities, which also already have such great cost constraints. But hopefully, folk work with the larger municipalities and find those zones where maybe zoning can be improved to provide the housing that is necessary and that has the local buy-in.
Another question that came up on energy is how do you propose to handle the rising costs of fossil fuels, including natural gas, as results of global conflicts in Ukraine and Iran? Do you still see natural gas as an affordable option given so much global price volatility?
Well, currently, if you look at the market today, natural gas power generation is the cheapest or second cheapest after nuclear because we locked in a lower price in nuclear. So it's still cheaper than in Connecticut than the purchase agreements that we're paying for most of the solar development and the wind development. So even with the volatility and the increased price this year, natural gas, because it's much more difficult to export than oil, and it's in surplus in the United States generally, is still going to be an affordable option And the thing is, if you have a shortage of natural gas, then what the grid turns to burning is oil, which is twice as dirty in terms of its carbon emissions and in terms of its particulate emissions. So the actual air quality consequence, it's really bad. So I want to see wind, solar, nuclear, hydro drive down costs and succeed and proliferate. But if we don't have natural gas as part of the mix, the likely other option is going to be oil, as we see on some of the coldest days of the year when those oil plants fire up, and that's going to be far worse for the environment.
Another question on energy related. What is your strategy to deal with utility companies as part of your strategy to bring down costs?
Oh, listen, I've been, I think, a strong voice in the legislature over 5.5 years to strengthen oversight of the utilities. I co-authored a law that will reduce their profit on transmission. The profit on transmission has grown more than on delivery and distribution, and that's a problem. So I was proud of that. I passed Senate Bill 7 with my Democratic colleagues in 2023 above objections from the utilities. And, when, Governor Lamont gave a sweetheart deal on the Aquarian sale to Eversource, that, probably increased their windfall by a few $100 million above what was reasonable, I stood up and opposed that. So I think that you need a stable and fair and predictable environment for investment. So, we want everyone to succeed here, but there needs to be oversight and a balance that has not been struck under the Lamont administration. And I think I've, stood up to excesses from the utilities over the last 5.5 years, and I would do that as governor too.
Great. I think final question. What role do you feel the state should play in responding to homelessness and housing insecurity?
Oh, it needs to provide leadership. I mean, government has, I think, a responsibility, and that it's broadly accepted that we need to provide for those who are down on their luck and experiencing the most difficult circumstances among us. And that means housing for people who don't have it, but also the long-term help and services. Because while some homeless are economically disadvantaged and down on their luck, lost their job and so on, others are experiencing, mental health crises or substance abuse crises, and they need the long-term services, not just kind of the Band-Aid approach. So the state has a responsibility. I think the state spends $90 million or $100 million a year on homelessness services broadly. And, I think we have several, 5,000 homeless. And so we need to ensure that our state government is working effectively with that, $20,000, $30,000 per person in order to ensure that those people can get the services they need, get back on their feet, and ultimately live as healthy and productive a life as is possible. So the state government does have a responsibility to provide that.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have, just to be respectful of your time, Ryan, and the audience. But on behalf of RPA, I first just want to thank you for participating in this. And I want to thank everybody for their great questions and for viewing at home. We will be posting this recording soon, as I'm sure CTN will be doing. And we do have a few events coming up that we'll share in the chat, but we've got a nonpartisan pro-home state candidate training. I'm going to butcher this, but I think it's on the July 27th. And then we have a report release, our second in series Homes on Track, scoring transit-oriented community opportunities, coming up on July 28th. Those should be in the chat. And just a reminder, the Democratic primary is on Tuesday, August 11th, and the general election is on Tuesday, November 3rd. So thank you again, Ryan, and appreciate your time today. And thanks everybody for participating. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Pete.